Immigrants and refugees that are coming to Canada. What kind of criteria does Canada use to accept new immigrants and refugees to Canada? Welcome to lesson 5.2. We are going to discuss how immigrants immigrate to Canada as well as refugees. We're going to be talking about refugees. We're going to be taking a look at the four different classes of immigration and how do they get into our country to contribute to Canadian society. So stick around and let's learn something. All right, welcome to lesson 5.2. What criteria does Canada use when accepting immigrants and refugees? Stepping all the way back to 2002, we're going to talk about the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And in this Refugee and Protection Act, four categories of immigrants are identified. First, we have our economic immigrants, and those are going to be skilled workers and business people, and that's going to make up the majority of our immigrants. After that, we have our family class. So those are relatives of people who are already living in Canada who are Canadian citizens. So then we can have family and relatives come over. Then we have refugees. A refugee is anybody that's escaping persecution, torture, escaping cruel and unusual punishment. Maybe there's a war, there's natural disasters, things like that. And then our last category of immigrants is an other category. So these are extraordinary cases that don't typically fall within the economic class of immigrants, the family class of immigrants, or refugee class of immigrants. Now, these are for humanitarian and compassionate reasons. So they don't qualify as refugees. They would be seen as the other category. And you can see right here on the right-hand side, our immigrants contribute to a very well-educated Canada. They are politically engaged. Their donations are generous. They contribute to our future, and the social benefits far outweigh those of just the economic benefits, so which is really nice to see. Now, what are some of the objectives that Canada hopes to achieve with immigration? Well, we want to make sure that we can pursue social, cultural, and economic benefits. We want to respect, of course, our bilingual character that we have here in the country, but we also have a very multicultural character as well, and our immigrants will bring that to Canada. We want to support the development of official language minority communities. So we'll talk about how immigrants who are French-speaking immigrants contribute to our society. We want to make sure that our economy remains prosperous. We, of course, if we take a look at the family class of immigration, we want to make sure that we can reunite families, and ultimately we want to have a successful integration where we recognize the mutual obligations that exist here in Canada. And as I was reading that, you can see on this graphic here, this is back from 2017, where there was an ambitious plan for population growth here in Canada, and we'll be talking about why we need to have that population growth happening through immigration as opposed to natural means, which would be Canadians having more children. So why do we need immigrants? Well, this image right here does explain a little bit of that, but we're going to dig deeper into that. Well, we're going to start with two words first: demographic. That's to do with the characteristics of a population, and something called labor force growth. Now, this was part of your vocabulary, and labor force growth is the growth of the actual labor force, so the working Canadians, the working society, or the number of people who can actually work. Now, between the years of 2025 and 2030, so we're approaching the beginning of what's about to happen, our birth rate in Canada is going to equal our death rate. So without immigration, we're going to plateau with our population. Back in 2016, we saw this in our labor force growth, where it plateaued a little bit because our retiring workers were equaling the new workers that were coming in. So there wasn't anything really being created there. So if we are not, as Canadians, if we're not those that are living here, having bigger families, then we have to take a look at immigration to ensure a growing population and our growing economy. So how did immigrants used to come to Canada? Well, there's many ways, but up until recently, we were using something called the points system. There's a little cartoon here. This is from the grade 9 textbook, and it's called Adding Up the Points. Jay here, he wants to come to Canada, but is he going to be able to come to Canada? And what the point system was, it was a way for potential immigrants, people who wanted to come to Canada as an economic class immigrant, to be able to apply and come into Canada. So back during the point system era, you needed 67 points to qualify to have your application looked at. If you wanted to immigrate to Canada. And there were 6 factors that you needed to enter into Canada that you could apply these points to. The first one was education. Then the second was your ability to speak one of Canada's official languages, so French or English. Then your work experience. What work experience do you currently have? The fourth factor was age. How old are you? The fifth factor is whether or not you have arranged employment already in Canada. And the sixth factor was your adaptability. What do you already have maybe in Canada, maybe a relative or whatnot, that you could qualify? So you needed a minimum of 67 points in order to qualify. Now, this was only for economic immigrants. And this all started in 1967, and you needed 67 points to qualify. I'm not sure if that 67 has to do with the 1967 year that it was implemented. I'm not entirely sure. So you go through all of this, and you can see we've got our 6 factors here. Your ability to speak English or French to a total maximum points of 28. Maximum points for education is 25. Experience, work experience that is, for 15 points. Your age, here it says younger is better, is 12, but too young is also not good because you need to be of working age, because this is for economic immigrants. Do you already have a job arranged in Canada, for 10 points, and your adaptability is 10 points. So do you already have somebody that is here? So once you qualify with your 67 points, you pay your application fee roughly in the $1,000 range, and you have to provide proof that you are not a criminal and that you are in good health. If you pose a risk to Canadians, then you're not going to be able to come and immigrate to Canada. So if you've got that criminal record, maybe you do pose that risk to Canadians. Or if you're not in good health, then maybe you will have you'll put too much strain on our healthcare system. And every economic immigrant that is coming in must provide proof that they are in good health. So various different countries, they will have doctors that you can go to that are approved from the Canadian government, and you can go and get your medical exam. Now, you could be refused based on health conditions. You could be refused if your health could put other Canadians at risk. So let's say you have tuberculosis, let's say, for example, it's highly contagious. You might be denied entry. Maybe you could endanger public safety. Maybe there's a condition that you have that puts others at risk, or you could put an excessive demand on our healthcare system, and you might have something that would cost a lot of money to treat, and therefore you could potentially not make it into Canada as an economic immigrant. So this point system lasted a long time, but there were some major disadvantages, some clear disadvantages to the points system. First, application in is the first one to be processed. So if there's a long line of applicants, then you're going to be waiting a very long time. It made it very difficult because it was first come, first serve. It was difficult to prioritize applicants. Maybe there was an economic immigrant coming in that we definitely could use here in Canada, but because of this system, it's first in, first to be processed, we might be waiting a long time to reap the benefits of that potential immigrant coming in. The potential applicants, they weren't always matched up with job openings here in Canada, unfortunately. And you're looking at about 12 to 14 months to process just your application. Okay, nothing else. That's only your application. So you are sitting or you're waiting in your home country waiting to come to Canada, and you're waiting over a year for that process just to be looked at. So what started happening in January of 2015, the express entry system made its way and it replaced that points system. And this is still dealing with our economic immigrants. We're looking for skilled foreign workers so that they could have this express entry so that they can make their way into Canada. It's a new type of application, and it applies, again, only to our economic immigrant programs. And what happens, instead of being first in, first processed, this is taking a look at your qualifications of the candidate, and the most qualified are going to be coming into the country rather than the first person who filled out the application form. And this is to attract high-skilled workers, and we want to drive the innovation of Canada's economy and society, as well as have a strong economic growth here in the country. Now, express entry, if you are a candidate with express entry and you have a valid job offer from one of the provinces or one of the territories, you're quickly going to be entering the country. There's a new job bank that's going to connect potential Canadian employers with a vast variety of skilled foreign national applicants if they can't find Canadians or permanent residents to actually do that job here in Canada. So first, these companies, these businesses, these employers have to first find to make sure Canadians or permanent residents can fulfill the need for that job. And if not, then those employers can use this job bank to connect to skilled foreign nationals. And the processing time for this is not over a year. It should be less than 6 months. So 6 months at the maximum, it's saying, but it could be less. And it uses something called the Comprehensive Ranking System, the CRS. And it's looking for the highest scoring candidates to be invited, whether or not, whether it doesn't, based on whether or not, no, actually, let me rephrase that. The CRS, sorry for this, the CRS is looking for the highest scoring candidate, regardless of when that individual applied through the express entry pool. So it's not a first come, first serve basis system like the points system was. And it's divided into 4 main components. So you've got your core/human capital factors. Then you've got your spouse and common law partner factors, your skill transferability factors, and your additional points. So like, do you have that job offer for a maximum of 1,200 points? So for your core points, they're looking at your age, looking at your education, your language skills in terms of French and English. Do you have any work experience? What about your spouse? What are your spouse's skills or experience if you have a spouse? And how well do your skills actually transfer from where you are now to Canadian society? And then you can also get extra points if you already have family here in Canada. So maybe you have a sibling here in Canada, right? If you're bilingual, so if you know both French and English. Maybe you attended school here in Canada and you've got a post-secondary Canadian education. Maybe you already have a job offer. Maybe you're part of the provincial nomination program. We'll talk about that in a few lessons. But all of these things kind of add up and you get a maximum score of 1,200. And then potential employers, they pull from that pool, and the best qualified economic immigrants will be coming into the country as opposed to the first in, first processed type. So we've got 2 steps on entering using the express entry method here in Canada. Step number 1, you fill out your express entry profile. This is all done online, and you complete your CRS, your comprehensive ranking system. You then go and register with the job bank, and you go and you promote yourself, and then you will be accepted into the express entry pool if you can do those things. Step number 2 is you receive an invitation to apply for a job, an ITA. If you have that job offer from either a province or a territory, you're given additional points, and you can use that to your ITA. And you can then apply for permanent residence online within 60 days. So a much, much faster process than what we were using with the points system. So you complete all of this, and then you do your application fee. Now, the points system application fee was fairly expensive at approximately $100. This one is still, yes, it's still expensive, but not as much as $1,000. So each adult will pay approximately $550, and then $150 if you have any children. The right of permanent residence is just under $500 at $490. But if you have children who are dependent on you, so children typically under the age of 18, they do not need to apply for that. But you still, like in our points system, you need to pass a medical exam and your security check as well. Make sure you're not holding a criminal record before you're allowed to enter into Canada. And this is, our policies are always changing, and you know this. And this express system, this might work for a while, and if it doesn't, then the Canadian government will go and adjust and make changes as needed. And our policies have definitely changed in Canada over the years. So in the past, we always in Canada favored immigrants of British ancestry. And unfortunately, Canada restricted the immigration of many countries in Asia, like that of China and India. Fast forward to today, and no one is excluded because of their race or their country of origin. But it wasn't always like that, unfortunately. Like it says here, in the past, we favored immigrants of British ancestry while restricting immigrants from China and Asia. And I'm going to give you an example of, from China and India. And I'm going to give you an example of when Canada restricted immigration from India with the Komagata Maru. And I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, and my apologies if I didn't. But there once existed a clause within the Immigration Act here in Canada that if you are going to immigrate from India, you had to travel directly from India all the way to Canada. You could not stop anywhere on your journey. So you had to make a direct line from India to Canada. Now, this in 1914 is when the Komagata Maru set sail, but it didn't set sail directly from India because that passage did not exist. There was no line from India direct to Canada. You could get to Canada from India, but you have to make stops along the way. But our Immigration Act at the time did not allow for that. So in 1914, when this ship left, it was turned back to India. And when it did return back, some of those passengers on that ship were killed because the passengers on that ship were fleeing India because they were protesting Indian independence from Britain. And back in 2008, we have Stephen Harper apologizing for this. And then there was another formal apology that took place in 2016 from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. I'm going to show you a map, and you can see Canada, where Canada is. And I'm going to use my mouse. You can see where India is. So in 1914, if you wanted to immigrate from India, you needed to do a direct route from India to, going over and across the Pacific Ocean to get to Canada's west coast directly from India. So you could not stop anywhere along the way in any of these countries, in any of these nations. It just wasn't allowed. And that direct line did not exist. And that was a way for Canada to restrict the immigrants coming from India. But they also mentioned China in a couple of those previous slides there. We also made it difficult for Chinese immigrants to immigrate to Canada by imposing a head tax on Chinese immigrants. And this in 1885, so long ago, there was a $50 fee if you wanted to come to Canada from China. And in 1903, it skyrocketed to $500. In 1903, $500 is going to be a lot of money, and that's really going to restrict Chinese immigrants coming from Canada. And that's why the Canadian government put such a high cost. They wanted to restrict that. Then, in 1923, Canada had the Chinese Exclusion Act, which stopped all Chinese immigrants from coming into the country. But by 1947, Chinese Canadians, obviously living here in Canada, started to get the right to vote, and this head tax had since disappeared and all of that business. And then finally in 2006, then Prime Minister Stephen Harper apologized, and any survivors from this time period in Canada or their widows would get $20,000 in compensation. And that worked out to about 220 people who qualified for that. All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about the policy that we now have towards our refugees. So that's part of this lesson as well. Now, what is a refugee? Well, a refugee is a person fleeing from danger or from persecution. And we began offering refugee status, and I see here on the second bullet I did spell refugee wrong. We began offering refugee status to specific crises that began in the world. We started doing this in 1951. The problem was that the crisis needed to be recognized by Canada for a refugee to actually qualify on being a refugee. But we have changed that. In 1976, we started offering people facing any persecution anywhere in the world the ability to come to Canada as a refugee. And today we have this commitment, this international commitment to protect refugees under our Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And we can settle refugees in two ways here in Canada. First, through the work of the UN, and working with the UN, we can bring in refugees to Canada from various refugee camps that exist in the world, or we can take a look at private sponsors who are able to bring in refugees to Canada. And all refugees, regardless of where they're coming in or how they're coming in whichever of the two ways, either through working with the UN or private sponsors, all our refugees will require basic necessities of life. They will require government assistance. Most will require language training, job training, and all of this to be integrated into Canadian society. So ultimately, we're going to be taking a look here. We're doing all of this for immigrants, for refugees. So what is the objective of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act? Well, number one, it's to save lives and offer protection. We need to fulfill and affirm Canada's commitment to protect refugees, because we do have a commitment on the world stage to protect refugees. We need to grant fair consideration to people who are claiming any kind of persecution against them. And we need to offer refuge to people who are persecuted based on their race, on their religion, their political membership, and to people who are facing torture or cruel and unusual punishment. We often take for granted our life here in Canada, and oftentimes we forget what non-Canadians are sometimes facing outside of Canada. And this is part of the objectives of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. We've got the Immigration Act of 1976 here on the left-hand side, and we've got the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act on the right-hand side. This is back from 2002. This kind of just says who is inadmissible to coming into Canada. So in 1976, you were not allowed into Canada if you were a member of any of the following classes. So it says persons who have engaged in acts of espionage or subversion against democratic governments, institutions, or processes as they are understood to be in Canada. Or you were not granted admission in 1976 based on persons who there are reasonable grounds to believe will, while they are in Canada, engage in or instigate the subversion by force of any government, be it the Canadian government or any other government. And then in 2002, they changed the wording, and you are inadmissible if They kept the espionage and the active subversion clause in there. Okay, engaging in, where it says 34B, engaging in or instigating the subversion of by force of any government. Again, they kept that one. Then they've got engaging, C, engaging in terrorism. D, being a danger to the security of Canada. E, engaging in acts of violence that would or might endanger the lives or safety of persons in Canada. Or F, being a member of an organization that there are reasonable grounds to believe engages, has engaged, or will engage in acts referred to in either paragraph A, B, or C. Now, this was added in 2002 in response to a major event that took place in 2001. Wonder if you know what that is, if you remember what that is. The terrorist attacks on September 11th of 2001. We have changed our Immigration and Refugee Protection Act to protect Canadians from such events from taking place. That was a little bit of a long lesson. I'm not going to lie. I enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it and you got a lot out of it. Now what I want you to do is head over to your notebooks and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.